Good morning. I don't really know what language to speak because I see that there are so many people here who don't speak Russian, and I feel a little bit uncomfortable, but I apologize. I will be speaking in Russian, and I hope the interpreter will give you a really good idea of everything, and if something is unclear, I will explain it later. Okay, let's get started. First of all, I'm so excited that this conference is one of the first conferences in the CIS which provides access to information like this. It is usually inaccessible in the CIS, and I would like to say thank you to my company for doing this. Again, my name is Sofia Chebanova, and I will be speaking about this magical approach for game designers. So, when I was 15 years old, I had something going on in my life. Let's imagine that our family had a microwave. There were two knobs where we had to turn. One knob was for changing the power, and the other one was for changing the time. Do you remember microwaves like that? They didn't have any buttons back then. Well, my father couldn't figure this microwave out at all, and if somebody changed the power, then his food would always be cold, and he would get really upset about this. And as I was looking at this, I understood that a microwave is a really simple system that people get to interact with. And in real life, we interact with systems which are much more complicated. When you're 15, you want to change the world. And I started thinking, how can I change the world? How can I help people like my father, to work with systems like that? And that is how I got into game user research, user experience research. And I hope that I am helping people manage complex interaction. As I said, I used to work in the ITMO University. I was involved in research, I worked in consulting, but research plays the biggest role in companies releasing products, and that's when I joined Wargaming. And that's where my task was the most interesting. Games are really complicated systems which require a large set of additional skills that you need to have under your belt. So now you know a little bit about myself. I would like to find out who you are. Are there any game designers here? Game producers? Only one? Wow. Okay, we'll remember you. UX specialists? Great. Art guys? Project managers? Okay. So, art guys and game designers here mostly. Got it. Okay, well, I'm sure that for you as game designers and art specialists, you want to create the new Overwatch, to say the least, or an even more legendary game. And I'm sure you have been working on games like that for a long time. You have put a lot of effort into it. You have worked for a year, for 2 years, and afterwards, when you release this game, in the best case scenario, the audience is really excited about this game, that they say that this is just what we wanted. But what can you do if the game is not welcomed by as many people as you expected? Even if you think that what you released is what you wanted to release, what happens? You spent time, you spent money. Has anybody been in this situation like that? Have you ever developed a game that wasn't successful? Wow, you guys are really lucky, huh? Only one. Okay, well, I'm happy that you have been lucky with that, but I am confident that even though your games have already been successful, they can be even more successful. We all create fantastic games, and research can help you do that. What is research? What is game user research? Sounds complicated, especially in Russian. Game user research is a way of engaging potential game users or your actual game users, which allows to see how the game is played in real life, how people react to the game. And therefore, using this data, you can improve the game. The data, it can be gathered not only when you are observing your players in real time, but it can be gathered through surveys when they respond to your questionnaires. Also, you can use statistics, which is logged into your game. So these are the three main sources of data, which allow you to see what happens to the player during gameplay and how this matches to what you considered. You know, when I just started doing this, people told me that it's impossible. This is just too complicated, too expensive. You can't do that. But actually, around the world, this practice has been applied over the past 20 years, even more. And so, in order to make a really good product, this step has to be integrated into the development process. So what methods can we use? How can we research your game users? The most important thing for games is the playtest. You show your game and you see how the game users play. Are they playing like you intended, or are they taking a new approach to the game? Another way of testing is the UX usability testing. You research in detail the behavior of one single player and you see what obstacle he encounters when playing the game. There is also another very simple, very intuitive way to figure out what's happening to the player. You can ask him. You can ask him individually or in groups. You can put them in a group and find out what their opinion is as a group of your product or something else. Another simple ways to send a survey, you don't even have to see the game users, they'll reply, and then you can use this data in your work. And a really complicated way to research is using biometric equipment, which registers all actions of the player during battles. And this is a pretty complicated task. I will talk about it later. Okay, so let's take a brief look at the game development cycles. You have a concept, you have an idea, you write it down. There is nothing to play yet. And it seems like this is a good time to research. Then you take the most simple instrument that you know very well, and then you create a very simple prototype, which brings to life the most simple features. And you can play it and do other things with it. And then the next stage involves improving the prototype, using more complex and up-to-date equipment. You have closed, public, alpha, beta testing, and then you move on into live operation of the game. This is what it looks like on your part. But what does it look like from the point of view of the player? So for the game player, a game is a set of gameplay, audio, setting, the story, impressions, emotions, his excitement from hearing about the game from his friends, from coworkers. This is what really gets them into the game. Your tests, your development is not something that interests the player. Having said that, the game user is your main resource as a developer. When you engage game users in your work, you are using free labor, which tells you, hints you what they need. And the main question is to figure out how these players correlate with your demographics, with your target audience. So these are the potential game players who are interested in the genre, in the mechanics, or whatever else may be. But you have to understand who you are targeting, and you have to develop this game for them. Before I started to speak, somebody asked me how many people should be in the test. I'll probably disappoint you, but in order to identify most problems, you only need 5 players. You don't need a lot of money, you don't need a lot of time. 5 players is enough. This has been confirmed by research. After the 5th response, the data begins to repeat, and it's pointless to continue the experiment. This is used for testing interface, for gameplay. But for new gameplay, you need about 20 people. But having said that, if you think that you can just have them come in once and they'll tell you everything, it's not like that. In our laboratory in Minsk, we see about 1,000 players per year. We find new players every time. We never invite people more than once because then they understand what will be done at the testing. So probably you're wondering how you can find them. You can find them in forums. If you know who you're targeting, then you just go on Facebook, you send a message to your potential players, you tell them that we have a new game, you can come play, we'll have gifts, and people do come. Okay, so now let's get to the point. As you remember, we were talking about the development cycle, and the first stage was the concept. So this means you really don't have anything other than a description of what you want to do. So what can you research at this point? Do you have any ideas? Okay, it's written up there, but still. The first thing, the most simple thing, is to see what your competitors are doing, what they are doing, what their strengths are. You can test it on the games. You can see what the players like, what they don't like. On the other hand, you can see what they're missing in the game. And you have great information to see what you can do in your game so that these people can leave your competitors and start playing your game. There is a hitch here. If you are making a competitor for a very famous, well-known game, you have to understand exactly what will motivate the players to leave this popular game to you. So just imagine Clash of Clans, a huge game, and you want players to leave it. And the second thing I want to talk about today is researching the concept art or the game setting. Oftentimes, you have a rough idea of what the game will look like, what characters you will have, what the location, the setting will be. Okay, so this will be our character. A Russian folk character, Kolobok. Probably we need another character. Okay, let's take him. This is our second character. Do you think they fit well together? Can we have a game where both of these characters organically fit together? And what if we say that this Kolobok has a Kalashnikov? So we have to compensate for the Kalashnikov and help our bird. We have to give it a superpower. So she gets a shovel to dig out potatoes. So we have a horror game, a Kolobok with a Kalashnikov, he has to meet a bird with a shovel. So let's imagine, where can this take place? What about here? From the outside, this is what it looks like, but they will chase each other somehow, and we will have to play the game. So on the inside, the setting will look like this. What do you think? Are you thinking that this doesn't go together at all? That this game cannot possibly be successful? So you're getting this feeling. Just one person is getting this feeling. Okay. That's true. In this situation, players say that Kolobok cannot have a Kalashnikov. He does not have hands. He can jump, so his superpower can be jumping. He can interact with different surfaces. And as for the bird, we already know this bird from Angry Birds, that it flies and destroys objects. So the mechanics that the users expect from their previous experience is somehow similar. So as for the shovel, the games aren't really getting any confidence from the shovel. Really, what can you do with a shovel other than dig potatoes? As for the setting on the outside and the inside, we have done a lot of experiments that are related to that, and we've noticed that people use their knowledge that they get from Hollywood movies to see what should be done in this setting. So if you do a lot of research and you make a setting, the players will say, no, this is not realistic. I just watched a movie yesterday, and this is what it looked like. This is a very modern movie, and you can't have this old streetlight. But those who have been to the US know that there is always a combination of the impossible there. So what can we do at the first stage? Now we know. Let's move on to the second stage, the technical prototype. At this point, we have something to show to our players. We now know that we need to invite them to see how they play our game. At this point, we can understand how our game mechanics playable, how they work together, and we are getting an understanding of why should these players play this game. So I want to tell you about a test we've done, and the point I want to make is that the prototype has to be of a high quality. But our clients brought us this prototype. You see that the mechanics involve these squares with numbers, and on top we have time. So these are all the special effects in this game. And there's a mini map. You have points which you have to take over. So the point of the game is to take over the points, and those people who have the biggest weight have taken this point. The points light up red or blue on the map, and then the teams develop a strategy in order to get more and more points on the map. So while we were testing this game, I thought nobody would understand that. But it turned out that it's a fantastic game, that it reminds them of the games they played when they were little. They said it's cool, that all the mechanics are clear. So then the developers continued to work on the concept because the game turned out to be very successful. So I really do want to tell you that low detailed and low fidelity prototype can help you. Don't be afraid if you think that your prototype is not of a really good quality. The players will figure it out. If they can't figure it out, they'll ask you, and you'll fix what you need to fix, and you'll show to them later. So I was already speaking about motivation, about rewards, and in this respect, I recommend going to Ben's report about reward psychology in terms of psychology, like I said. The presentation will take in Blue 5 right after my presentation, but we're moving on. So we're on the production stage. At this point, we can do a lot of research because there are new and new features in this game. Now you have tutorials, you have new interfaces, you have a clear flow, and you also defined what you will use, the joystick or the keyboard, how many buttons will be used. You can test the maps, how varied they are, how interesting they are. You can even test audio at this point. I want to tell you a story about how we tested our tutorial. This was a long, long time ago when I just joined Wargaming. We as a company decided that we don't have enough tutorials. We don't have tutorials in our games because the players can't figure some things out, so we have to help them somehow. The tutorial was very simple. It showed them how to use a tank, how to shoot. And there was a new piece of information which was very useful to the advanced players who played shooter games, that they can use shift to transition to sniper mode. So let's take a more clear look. This is how the instruction looked like for the player. The instruction is on the left, and the shift button lights up. Let's go back on the screen. You can see what it looks like. So we invited the players. They did the tutorial, and we asked them how the tutorial was. And they said, oh, it was so cool, so useful. It was fantastic. We got it. We'll play the game. So we told them, okay, so go to battle. The player went to battle, and he's just waiting. The situation is becoming more and more serious. He needs to go to sniper mode. And he realized that he does have a button he can use, but he can't remember what button it was. So he lost. He had to leave the battle. But we had to ask him, so now what? What do you think of the tutorial now? Did it help you to be more effective in the game? The player replied, yeah, it was really useful. It's my fault. I just couldn't remember what key I needed to use. And our developers said that, well, the tutorial worked, the player is satisfied, so we'll release it. But I said, no, let's wait. You just saw that he didn't remember this key. That was a bad explanation. He can't use it. Our task is not only to tell him what he needs to do, but to check that he understood it and that he can apply this. Otherwise, what's the point of the tutorial? Just to tell them that you did a tutorial? Push next? So I really invite you not to believe everything the players say. When you ask them how good everything was, they'll say everything was great, everybody did a good job. Trust only what you see they do, and try to understand why they do it. As for the interface of developed games, I recommend that you go to the presentation which Konstantin and Camille will make. They will talk about how to make great UI for a game. I think that you will speak about game interface in greater detail then. All right, let's move on to the next stage, live operation. So we have already put all our effort into the game. Why should we test the game when it is already in live operation? You might think that, but that's not exactly true. For us as developers and for the players, it's always great to improve something, to change something. On the other hand, it's always interesting for me to see how they use game mechanics in real life. For example, we developed a really complicated system, and I want to see if they understood it or if they came up with something new. And I want to see what new tasks they now have, what they're missing, what they need to play the game longer. So last year, our developers came to us with this mini-map, and they told us we have this mini-map but we think that it's missing something. The players don't understand from this map where they can't pass through. And they don't understand what objects can be destroyed and what objects can't be destroyed. And you don't really understand where you can hide. Why don't we make other maps so that they're more convenient to use? So they came up with 3 more maps, a black and white map. For strategy, seems like this type of map is better. The second map showed all of our graphics capabilities. It was full of detail. And the third map had only the destructible houses. They were marked in white. And it also had the places where you can't get through on a tank. And what do you think? What did the game users choose? So who thinks it was the first one? Let's see. Who thinks about the pretty one? All right. And the last map. This brief map. So, okay. So most of you think it's either 2 or 3. So we used a tracker to see how the players use these maps, how their patterns change depending on the map that they use. What did we find out? Our users are fairly experienced, and when they see this map, they understand more or less where everything is. They don't study the mini-map to see where they need to go. They use the mini-map to see where their allies and where their enemies are. So they use it to create a strategy. As for the houses that are destructible or not, can you hide here or not? They don't really need this in a game. Their main job is to cover their side bases, because if it's open, they need to go there and cover it. They don't care if there's a good place to hide there. So our players chose this strategy map, and we now use it in the game. So the players know for themselves what they need. Don't try to think for them. Don't offer them more than they need. Save your resources for something they really need. So the players interact with the game, and they interact with all of the services in the game environment. Because the game itself is not everything. He needs to find the game, he needs to download it, he needs to register. He wants to read about this game, to find out how others play this game. So there's so many web services created for supporting the player to provide for better engagement. So together with our tank portal, we studied how people register for the game. So we had a really exciting description. Tanks, tanks, they're so cool. But 30 minutes later, after trying to register and trying to install our game, they still don't understand if this game was free or not. They didn't know if they managed to register or not. They didn't know what to do next. They read the user agreement. They looked at the main page, at the gameplay. They did understand that the game is about tanks, but nothing else. And they decided that they don't need to watch the video because it's probably boring, and they're not going to even open it. We as a company thought they would open it, really get excited about it, and start to play. But no, so we had to redo everything. And the second thing we found out is that we use our developer language on all of these pages, and our players, our game users, don't understand it. They don't understand seemingly simple things from the IT world. So the next step we made was to try to communicate with the players using the words that they understand. We got rid of any words that might be considered the least bit complicated. If you want to find out more about these services, you should come see Max's presentations. He will talk a lot about this. And we are moving on. So we already talked about the testing that can be done at different stages. It'd be cool if, having tested the game once, we would be finished and just be happy with ourselves because we created a game, the game that our players wanted. But this is not exactly how testing works. You take one object, you test it, you make adjustments, check these adjustments on the players. And this gives you a great opportunity to try something totally crazy in these tests. Give it a try with the players. Give them a chance to tell you if they like it or not. So, why do you, as a game designer, and we did figure out that you are game designers and art specialists, why do you need game user research? You needed to check your game design, regular design. Other than that, you will understand the needs, the preferences, the behavior of players. We know that players in World of Tanks don't know patterns, so we need to do a better job of explaining patterns. This also helps to resolve disputes among development team members. I'm sure that you have all been in a situation where you have been arguing forever about whose idea is better. But this option is much cheaper than releasing the game and realizing that your idea was not the best. And I'd like to remind you that every code has testers. For game design, for audio, there is no testing in general. And game user research is the tool to test everything related to the users. And it's fun to work with players. They teach you a lot. But you have to be ready for this. You have to be prepared for testing. You have to be prepared to hear criticism that something is not as cool as you thought it was, as you imagined it was going to be. And I already told you about some findings that were the most exciting in our work, but the thing is that the same methods are used in game user research everywhere. These methods are pretty simple. You don't need any special equipment to do this. Well, at least to start experimenting, you don't need anything. But you do need some type of space for this testing. As for usability and play testing, there will be a presentation about this at 4 o'clock. Sean will speak about this, and I also recommend that you go. But let's get back to the premises for testing. We used just a regular meeting room. We just took a laptop there, booked the meeting room, and put up a sign that this room will be used for testing. We invited players, and we just found out what they're doing. We didn't have any special tools, eye trackers, helmets that measure EEG. We really just observed what the players do and how they respond to our products. As for what we have accomplished now, it looks pretty different. This is the space we use for our clients. This is where game designers and all people who are responsible for this idea, they use it to look at the testing in real time, to look at the players, to observe the players. This is the space for the player. It doesn't look like your regular room where you play tanks in the evening. It's a bit more modern and chill. but that's what it looks like. This is the eye tracker to see where the player is looking when he's playing, and you can use different setups for consoles, for PC, for mobile. And all of this is compiled and put into a special program for a more detailed analysis to make a decision and try to understand what influenced the player's decision at a given point in time. This is our winning game plan, how to put all the players together, how to give them a credible story. And this is our meeting that we have before testing, and this is where the real stuff begins. So on the outside, it just looks like a regular computer club from the 90s. So this is a player testing a mobile game for mobile devices. And that is the galvanic reaction. And when it's done, the most interesting for researchers begins. They start analyzing the data. They see what the hypothesis, which hypothesis turned out to be true. And so your players are your co-developers of the game. After I showed you the lab, it might seem like this costs a lot, that it's impossible to implement in any company other than a huge corporation. But it's not like that. The money that you invest in research, you get back tenfold. So don't try to save on these things. Experiment, try to engage the players. Thank you.
Софья, чем кончилась история?
Sofia, so that idea with the shift button, the shift key, what was the end of it? Well, we actually redesigned the tutorial. Because that concept that we had, it didn't work well, so the players couldn't memorize that what the shift key was for. The best solution was actually to make the player use shift during the tutorial so that it becomes organic to them when they play. Hi, Sofia. Thanks for the presentation. How do you go about choosing your players for the test? What parameters do you align them by? How do you pick, I don't know, per country representation, per region representation, and so on? Well, let me start from the last part of your question. Of course, that is true that different regions have different player characteristics, and the play style in the ex-USSR is very different from what we have in the States. Europe in general is kind of in between. So in the ideal world, we would test it in every region because their experience in both in real life and in game determines how he or she will be playing with the next feature. it's also very important to have people in the audience who are very experienced. So we try to handpick those, and we try to find people that have a kind of an average profile. You know, if in the normal distribution we want someone from the hump part of it, from the biggest chunk of the players, not from the tail. We also try to find people who are likely to have difficulties in the game. Say we change the payment system, and we will test the people who have been using it as well as those who have never made the in-game payment. But we're also looking for people who don't have actually experience of online purchasing in general. So these are the people that are likely to have negative experience with this new payment tool. Therefore, we need them. So I hope I had a response to your question. Okay, my question is, say, if you have new users, if you're testing new cars, okay, and you have new users driving new cars, so we will have a lot of negative feedback, right? Because they are nervous, they are uncomfortable, they sweat, and so on. So I think you have a similar situation when you have new users try new features and you get a lot of negative results. Can you still use the negative results for your analytics? Can you make sense of it? Well, there's a fatigue curve in a user, and after a while, when that fatigue accumulates, the user will stop making sense of anything. So therefore, we want to make it a step-by-step introduction of the novel items that we have. Learn something, practice it, get good at it, then again, learn something else. So we aim at creating patterns one by one. I think this is really a difficult task, and we can talk about it in detail later on, because people, when they learn new, they will resist. This is what we are really, resisting change most of the time. Hi, Sofia, and thank you so much for the presentation. Do you do remote testing? Or does each office development center has a lab of their own? That is, can we use your services remotely? Well, we do have labs in a few places. At the same time, we don't do remote testing for security reasons. And I think it's a bad idea to test it remotely, because the resources you need are quite significant, and the prototypes that the users play on, they are not that well optimized. Therefore, you need specific configuration of your hardware to test it on. It can be maybe done with online games.
It's about cohort groups.
So about what? Sorry.
Cohort, like different group types. So, for example, with your map, picking the map example, is that how do you or your team accept that potentially the expert players would pick the black and white map because it's really good for strategy and team play, but a learning group might actually pick the one that's actually teaching them, but that's a different cohort group, and maybe they could be served a mini map for a while and then it changes over time? Or, you know, how do you deal with examples of different types of players through the evolution that they go through?
Соответственно, главное.
Well, I believe that an important part of that study was that we were using eye-tracking devices, and that allowed us to check how frequently the players addressed the mini-map and what kind of information they were gathering from it. Another thing that we did was run interviews after the test, And when we did that, we asked the players why, in their opinion, they were using the minimap. And it turned out that their opinion actually described their behavior correctly. When we suggested that this map is very useful, which could facilitate your game experience, and the experienced players said, well, we don't really need that. Thank you so much for your presentation. My question is on whether you test games by other developers. And do you do it for external customers, or do you do it to learn about your game in order to make improvements? I think it's a difficult question, actually. We do follow the competition. Yes, we do. More with some than with others, but we do. I think that's as much as I could say. We can take one last question, maybe? And we don't have it. Then there it is. Thank you.